Chapter 16. Love and Torment. The moon was soft outside the cave, and it hadn't rained on the island for days. I think the giant bear is now circling around under the tree, salivating over the piece of meat dangling high in the air. In a few moments it will be light, and it seems that danger will not appear. Sarit woke up once in the night and found me hugging her with a sweet smile on my lips. My mouth kissed her forehead again hard, so that Sarit could feel my love. She hooped her arms around me harder, and I hugged her harder. Sarit's forehead is soft, my chin resting against the bridge of her silky nose, her warm, moist breath caressing my neck and bouncing back up to be inhaled. A sweet, girly scent that spills into my brain and heart. Awareness stirred as my thoughts began to skyrocket. Sarit's soft body surging in my arms, her exuberant belly and breasts squeezing me, rubbing against my toned physique as if to blend in. Poe sleeps soundly, her even breaths ringing delicately in the back of my head. One of her calves hung over my waist, cradling my back as Sarit had done the other night. My loins had full access to Poe's half-ripe privates, radiating moist heat. I didn't dare move for fear of waking the sweet, innocent little one. Sarit's rubbing in my arms gradually gained some intensity, as if she was craving the pleasure of scratching. Her breathing became slightly rapid. Sarit's hair was soft, rubbing against the tip of my nose, and a gush of the fragrance of a young girl's silky hair, emanating from the top of her head, rushed into my nostrils. My lungs were huge, my toned and elastic pecs rising and falling with each breath, constantly punching her proudly lifted C***K, feeling the tidal wave of lotion inside, as ecstasy's puffy breasts hardened and loosened, constantly and consistently. Sarit's breathing continues to intensify, and the knot in my throat, baked by her warm, wet breath, can't help but swallow a stream of saliva and clench my teeth. One of her legs curls up and her knee pushes against my joined legs and penetrates the warm wetness that my abdomen was receiving from the top grinding of her wet organ in her lower body was far greater than the sensation that Poe was giving me in my hindquarters. The soft flesh at the base of Sarit's thighs had pressed against my most male organ. The muscles in my belly bulged as Sarit continued to squirm her delicate body wrapped in my arms, instinctively seeking friction. The thinness of her pants, woven by a fine layer of cotton thread, and the newly developed private organs of the young girl inside, released stronger heat and moisture, stimulating my abdomen. I don't know when my male organ filled with blood and swelled, having to rise diagonally in his pants due to the passive sleeping position. There was some discomfort in the skin and flesh around his masculine organ, but the top felt the soft flesh at the base of Sarit's thighs as gusts of pleasure began to circulate. Sarit, this 16-year-old girl, my little fiancée, was eager to give for the first time so intimately excited about me. I, on the other hand, could only move, begrudgingly accepting her warm title. Surge. The rough fingers of my right hand began to stroke her delicate spine, but I didn't dare to go too far for fear of waking up Poe behind me and Miyu next to me. The bulging muscles of her belly unconsciously squirmed, matching the rubbing of her hot, flushed private parts, feeling the sticky wetness staining them. Fingers slid to the end of Sarit's vertebrae again and stopped, not replying up, drawn to the moist source of heat between her buttocks and femurs, touching over gently with endless curiosity and exploration. The index and middle fingers scraped gently at the source of heat beneath the thin cotton threads, and the sticky warm love juices of the young girl's private parts melted and soaked out Sarit's fleshy, bulging torso, hauntingly gasping in my arms, twitching with the touch of her fingertips. I gently lifted my touching fingers, my thumb instinctively grinding against the middle finger of my index finger, feeling the lubrication of the mucus. Suddenly, Sarit's neck jutted back, the tip of her nose reaching upward, her warm lips and teeth slightly open, her mouth murmuring sorely. Poe's slender legs were still hanging firmly on my waist and ribs, and I didn't dare to move, but could only wait quietly for the arrival of Sarit's fragrant lips. Just the moment the flesh of her lips touched my mouth, a warm, fleshy tongue slid into my mouth. At that moment, I also lost control and shrugged my body a little. The hand that was caressing Sarit's buttocks instantly drew back to cover her fragrant cheeks, making her kiss deeper into my lips and tongue. The fingers that had stroked her were so close to the tip of my nose that I could smell the sticky, soft love juice secreted from her private parts, mixed with the characteristic dampness and urine smell of the squeezing organ, a faint freshness and sultriness that filled my breath. It was the private organ of Sarit's 16-year-old girl that secreted the odor for me, and I was infinitely grateful to her feminine femininity, to the odor that signaled health and seduction. As soon as her tongue was placed in my mouth, it was captured by mine, wrapping around the softness on top, sucking the moisture inside, and the two lips interlocked hard, circling and falling into a vortex of love. Miyu's baby suddenly grunts and cries. I immediately stilled my kissing motion and tucked in my neck. Sarit, sheltered by my broad shoulders, withdrew his tongue from being rolled and eaten, and slowly curled his body and buried his head in my arms. I heard Miyu rise as she picked up the child and rocked him in her arms to coax him. There was a sound of clothes rubbing together and the child's whimpering mouth squeezed and grinded twice, and stopped crying. It must have been Miyu pulling out her plump, engorged C***K and shoving her juicy, brown nipple into the child's mouth that quieted the surroundings. It reminded me of the days of my escape at sea, that moment of extreme thirst, when Miyu squeezed her nipples, permeated with the flavor of breastfeeding, into my parched mouth, and her fine, soft, dainty breasts rubbed against my cheeks. Recalling this, the taste buds of my mouth, flooded with multiple flavors, the liquid of Sarit's tongue, and my brain felt as if the fishy sweetness of milk had overflowed from her silky saliva. Sarit's warm breath taps gently on my chest again. It was almost dawn and Miyu shouldn't be sleeping anymore. Pretending to be awakened by a baby's cry, I sat up gently and surveyed the outside of the cave, noticing nothing unusual. Miyu sees me waking up and her gentle eyes cast over again, landing on my bare and toned back. Looking back at Miyu, a hearty sweet smile appeared on her delicate tired face. I gently removed Poe's thin, limp legs hanging from my waist and squatted down to Miyu, looking at the suckling baby. The little one, presumably waking up from hunger, was squinting his little eyes and greedily sucking on the given nipple. The light inside the cave gradually overpowered the firelight of the firewood with the sight of the morning sun. Miyu's white skin flowed down her plump breasts to her cleavage, giving off a flavor that made the taste buds of the memories in my head clearer, and the mouth nourished the sweetness of the remembered milk. I touched the baby's head. The first hair still had the feel of fetal hair. Miyu didn't know why, but she reached out a hand to stroke my cheek, her eyes gazing up at me in ecstasy. When her soft jade fingers touched the edge of my cheek, I felt a slight pain. It was a long blood stain from the sharp thorns of a tree branch when I was running in the daytime, and it was caressed by Miyu's infinite warmth. The seabirds on the island were making their crisp, loud calls again, and it was dawn. The giant bear didn't bother us, which gave me a lot of time to prepare. Before embracing Sarit, I had already figured out my plan for the day. The cave fire was still burning sluggishly, and I filled it with some dry wood to make it roar. Daggers chipped out 4 pieces of crocodile meat to bake for breakfast. In order to survive, the body must be given enough energy. The smell of meat gradually permeated the cave, and Poe rolled over, rubbing his sleepy eyes as he sat up and squatted over happily when he saw me baking food. It smells so good, can I eat this piece? I smiled and answered her, why? Every piece here is the same. She picked up a twig and mischievously poked the preferred piece of roasted meat, saying, this piece has a good color. Smells good to eat, ah. Huh. Miyu laughed at Poe's naivety, and I laughed too. Well, You can eat it if you like, but only one piece per person. Po is happy to hear my words and turns around and makes a playful face at Miyu, who laughs out loud. She had no idea of the intimacy that had secretly taken place between Sarit and me just moments before, while sleeping with one leg hanging over my waist. If it wasn't for Po, I don't know how I would have been able to stop myself from exploring Sarit's body. After a full breakfast, I came out with my mill guns and again kept them firmly within the cave to prevent the entrance of the beasts. I don't know what has become of the piece of crocodile meat hanging from the tree last night, but I must go and see what has happened, and if the meat is still there and has not been eaten by a huge bear or some other beast, I will fetch my food. Walking a short distance away from the large tree, I saw that the meat hanging from the branch pole was gone. I couldn't determine what had eaten it, so I had to walk up and observe and reason. It was a thick palm tree, its black and yellow bark curling upward with fuzz. A few chunks of bark had fallen off near the base of the tree, revealing the pale flesh of the wood inside, surrounded by scratches. The dirt behind the palm tree was a little damp, and the raised arches of mud were trapped to imprint the footprints of large animals. There must have been a struggle here last night, and from the palm prints one could tell that one of them was none other than a giant bear, while the other party to the fight resembled a wild hog, which, as one might imagine from the muddy prints of the hog's hooves, was not small in size. It is possible that one of them, attracted by the half-cooked roast and unable to get at the food, because it could not climb the tree, wandered underneath, scratching and gnawing at the bark, foolishly thinking that its huge body could decimate the palm tree and obtain food. However, a keen sense of smell is not just a gift of one animal. The other was also attracted by the smell of meat. Both sides thought they were the dominant ones in this territory, the kings at the top of the food chain, and they ended up biting each other. From the bristles and flesh on the ground, it was clear that the wild boar was finally bitten to death, and the carcass became food for the giant bear, which took it away to an unknown destination. The crocodile meat is presumed to have fallen to the ground and been eaten due to the impact of the giant beasts during the fight, or taken by leopard cats, seabirds, or the like. This made me extremely happy, and a good way to deal with the giant bear came to my mind. Since the wild boar was eaten by the giant bear and dragged away as a trophy, I would make this big guy that threatened our existence pay the same price. Chapter 17. Bait for Revenge. Back at the cave, I told Po to bring over 2 of the largest pieces of crocodile meat and handed her and Sarit some banana leaves. Wrap the meat and tie it tightly with a grass vine. Sarit listens to me, picks up the leaves and does as I say, a smile on her lips that she doesn't have in the past. Po asks curiously, "Is the food made this way good?" I looked up at her, and she looked at me, her big eyes blinking at me with questioning, flickering eyes. "It's bait, and when it's wrapped, you'll have to paste it with mud." With that said, I continued to lower my head and chip away at the sticks. The baby falls asleep, and Miyu gently walks over to her, trying to follow along and wrap the meat. The pain in her lower body had disappeared, and she was now in the recuperation phase. I watched Miyu's movements. She didn't look at me but smiled at Po and Sarit. Miyu did not look at me because she was afraid that I would worry about her physical healing and would not allow her to participate in labor. As meat wrapping is not a big physical job, I didn't say anything and continued to beat and peel the wooden sticks I brought back. Each stick is about the thickness of a wrist, and the wood is hard. It is chopped into 1 meter lengths, and then one end is sharpened with a dagger. The 3 women laughed happily as they did the work at hand. Soon, I beat and peeled 40 of them, then went outside the cave to carry back the wet mud so that the women could paste the wrapped fresh meat with the mud and wrap it with a layer of banana leaves. I used the hemp vine to tie up the made sticks, and they got the meat just the way I wanted it. You guys go wash your hands outside the cave and come back in a hurry while I block the cave door. Sarit, come with me. Po pulled my arm with both hands and pouted and shook it vigorously, expressing her displeasure that I was taking only Sarit and not her. I glanced at Miyu, who understood what I meant, and immediately pulled Po over, stroked her head, and went to wash her hands outside the cave. I don't know how Miyu comforted Po. The innocent girl hugged me in my arms as soon as she came in and said, "You have to come back early, Miyu, and I will wait for you." I stroked her head and hummed, and Sarit and I went out and lifted the stone to press the cave door shut. Swinging the bundle of sticks over my back, with 2 pieces of bait slung over my shoulder, I set off again, following the route I had taken yesterday in search of the spice. With the muzzle loader slung around my neck and the pistol still clutched in Sarit's hand, I held the long wooden pole used to pick out the snakes in one hand and grasped her small hand in the other. "Why don't I get the decoy?" Sarit saw how heavy I was carrying and tried to help me share. "You and I don't have the same physique. The decoy will be heavy for you, just like the stick I'm carrying. Don't you worry, I have all the strength in the world. What's 2 more pieces of meat? I can't let your weak body endure this just to make it easier. In case of sudden danger, neither can afford to run." I try to talk to Sarit as much as I can, utilizing small talk to slow down her fear. Grabbing her hand, I kept squeezing and gripping it as hard as I could, feeling her in the palm of my hand and enabling her to feel me. The thrill of yesterday's quagmire gives me the creeps even now, let alone a girl. This is no longer the mercenary era of jungle combat. No matter how dangerous, teammates rely on each other to cover to ensure their own safety. I can't ask anything like that of Sarit. She's not a devil-trained killing machine. She's just a 16-year-old girl, a soft woman, my woman. Along the way down, I'd picked apart 4 or 5 snakes coiled on branches with wooden poles. Their patterns a mixture of red and green, strange colors, spitting cores, one of them a pit viper, whose venom could kill a man in an instant. "You don't have to worry about me. Concentrate on walking. I'm not afraid to follow you anywhere. Since being your bride last night, death would feel happy." Sarit saw that I was worried about her and comforted me instead. I nodded and told Sarit that I got it and understood her affection for me. Even though she was 3 years older than Po and physically matured with a woman's affectionate nature, she was still ignorant about what happened between a man and a woman's body, which made me think she was really cute. Gradually, we heard the rushing stream again and smelled the spice plants. Coming to the boulder that had saved us yesterday, we lowered the load on our shoulders. "Here, Sarit, I'll carry you up." Without even asking, Sarit moved closer into my arms, and I lifted her to the top of the boulder, then carefully propped the decoy up, fortunately tightly wrapped, where the smell of fresh meat would have attracted poisonous snakes and beasts as Sarit and I passed through the woods. Drawing my dagger, I turned and chopped off 2 huge banana leaves behind me and handed them to Sarit, saying, "You stay on top, watch the bait, and don't break the surface layer of mud. I'll move the rocks in the stream below, up to 50 meters away from you. You stand on top of the rocks, and keep an eye out for movement around you, especially the bushes across the big slough." Sarit nodded vigorously and looked at me with a determined gaze. Then I said to her, "I will look up at you from time to time, and if the surrounding area is safe, you will shake the banana leaf from side to side. If there is danger, shake it up and down, and never shout, for it is apt to attract danger. Whatever danger I meet with, you must not come down, and if I fail to go back with you, you must crawl back through the valley behind you and never go through the woods." Before I could finish, 2 hot tears rolled down Sarit's swish, hitting the stone surface below and splattering away. "Don't cry. I mean, just in case, it won't be so easy to plant here. Don't ever come down. You won't be able to help this time. Don't tie my hands. Understand?" I told him in a low, cold voice. She tried her hardest to suppress her tears, biting her lip to hold back her sobs, and nodded her head at me forcefully. Choosing a nearby 20-meter section of the stream, I stood in the middle and lifted a rock. As the rushing stream continued to wash over me, I arched my back, pulled out a 100-pound boulder, and threw it onto the bank. The rocks in this section of the stream are weathered and washed down from the upstream mountains, large and small in various shapes, usually weighing 50 to 100 pounds. For my physique, it was as if Poe was holding Miyu's baby in the same proportion of weight. I try to make the best of my time, picking rocks out of the stream so that the plan is completed early, and I must get back to the cave before dark for everyone's safety. The stream lapped at my spine, and the muscles in my hands that lifted the rock bulged. The two large pectoral muscles swelled more than usual, bulging to the level of my nose. With a boulder weighing 400 or 500 pounds, I used leverage and then the current to will it downstream. Some of the rocks were slippery, or the current suddenly intensified, causing me to fall. Each time, I could see Sarit, standing on a distant boulder, waving her hand from side to side, suddenly stopping. For a moment, her heart and eyes tugging at me. I wave hastily, signaling her not to worry, that I'm fine, and then point my hand around the room, telling her to be alert and not to wander off. She nodded to me from a distance and continued to look around. 5 hours had passed, and my rough palms were beginning to burn, and blisters were forming on my thick calluses, making them slightly painful. There were few rocks left under this section of the gully that I had fished out, and standing on the flat ground, I could no longer see the splash. The stream had dented deeply. Returning to the boulder where Sarit was standing, I smiled at her from above. Sarit saw that I was safe and sound and smiled at me imploringly. Picking up the large bundle of sticks she had carried, Sarit, continue to watch the surroundings. I may not see you for a while, and when you find danger, you immediately call out to alert me. With that said, I slowly descended into the dug stream ditch. It was wide inside, about 2 meters deep, and about twice as wide as my arm span. I put the sharpened stick spikes vertically facing upwards into the rock crevices at the bottom of the gully, setting 2 of them within a meter and trying to center them as much as possible. After everything was done, I climbed up the stream gully and looked back at the dense rows of wrist-thick spikes underneath this 20-meter-long section of the stream, feeling a great sense of accomplishment, and looked back at Sarit on the boulder, both of us grinning happily. To save time, I reach out to pick up Sarit and ask her to do the ladder with me, and she is delighted, wrapping her arms around my neck and hesitating to come down. I cut thin branches with my dagger. She stood next to me and cut banana leaves. Then we both spread the branches and leaves over the top of the stream gully to hide the trap underneath. To confuse the stupid and greedy, small rocks and bushes are also placed on the supports to achieve the most realistic effect. I carried Sarit up to the top of the boulder again and told her not to come down again and to throw down one of the 2 decoys, which I tied up securely with a long hemp vine. Indy said to Sarit, I am going to the slough, and don't worry, it will be hard for them to bite me this time. You pay attention to the bushes and grasses there. If they keep shaking, it is the crocodiles running over. You have to shake the banana leaf up and down immediately. If the crocodiles are running fast, you also have to shake it eagerly so that I can make a judgment. If there is no movement, shake it slowly, from side to side. Sarit's eyes flashed, and I could tell from her expression and eyes that she was worried about me. I recalled the path I had taken that day and then headed for the quagmire. My surroundings again sent shivers down my spine as I remembered being chased and bitten by a large group of crocodiles. That day, after walking about 30 meters through the slough, I stopped. The grass in front of me was too thick. Any further walking could easily be surrounded by crocodiles and sneak up from behind me. I got rid of the mud on the bait, tore open the leaves that wrapped the fresh meat, took 2 steps back, and swung it out with force, throwing it into the deeper part of the mud slough. With the end of the hemp vine binding the decoy still clutched in my hand, looking back at Sarit, I give a wave of my hand and tell her to start paying attention. My eyes are also motionless as I watch the movement in front of me. There wasn't much wind at the moment, and the smell of the bait didn't spread easily, but I didn't dare to be careless and couldn't stop looking around. Not being able to see into the distance, I turned back to look at the signal flags that Sarit had struck. Sarit waving her leaves from side to side like a beautiful maiden dancing. While digging the ditch and placing the traps, I did not feel the heat due to the cool water of the stream. At this moment, however, it was the hottest part of the day, and the sun's rays were so poisonous that my cheeks and spine ached. I then remembered that Sarit had endured a long period of exposure to the sun and still couldn't stop smiling at me, and my heart was suddenly flooded with a million feelings of pity and love, and I really wanted to run back and hug her tightly. But this is a life-and-death situation, not a time for sentimentality. If you don't do it, you'll hurt yourself, you'll hurt Sarit, you'll hurt everyone. Chapter 18. The Trap That Penetrates the Flesh. Sweat is once again seeping into my eyes, and in addition to the pain, it's affecting my vision. As soon as I'm unsure of the safety of my surroundings, I instantly turn back to look at the signal Sarit is signaling. I don't know when Sarit's motion of swinging the banana leaf changed. She was already bobbing up and down sharply. Immediately recognizing the danger, I turned back to look at the mud slough, my heart pounding, and my mind once again reeling from yesterday's chasing and biting by hundreds of predators. The undergrowth in the distance began to shake, muddy water and grass branches lifting and flipping upwards. I could feel the air currents shifting in my face. The guys that were coming in, the lineup, must have been so strong that they actually drove the air around them. Can't wait any longer. The crocodile herd is about to run to the bait's position. I pull up the hemp vine and turn to run. My hand can feel the fresh meat rubbing and vibrating on the muddy ground. The palms of my feet kept making the effort, the wind whistling beside my ears. I couldn't take the time to look back. I only felt the smoke rolling behind me, mixed with the low roar of hundreds of fierce beasts. Can't let those ferocious guys bite the bait, or all preparations will be wasted. Running to the 20-meter section of the creek gully, I pranced across, and as soon as my feet hit the ground, I scurried forward quickly again. The hemp vine slipped through the middle of the false trap, the back end still pulling and tugging at the piece of fresh meat. My naked upper body was raw from the low branches in front of me, and I ran viciously toward the large tree I had previously favored, climbing upward and higher without a second thought. Only when it was impossible to climb any further up the thin pole at the top of the tree did he collect himself and rush to see what was happening behind him. Yesterday's hundreds of crocodiles, killing to the bait, pounced. Because of their different sizes, running in front of the small crocodile, more than a meter long, was behind the fast-running crocodile, directly knocked over, stomach and spine in the muddy water. Black and white alternately rolled, stabilized, and then adjusted the attack, continue to pounce on the food. I could feel that a few of the big guys in the group of crocodiles still retained their anger from not eating me yesterday. I rode on a thick tree trunk, inverting my arms to wrap and shrink the hemp vines.
诱饵很快地越过了陷阱，几十只膘肥体壮的大鳄已经冲到，300-400斤的大身子，扑通扑通连声响起，压断了搭在溪沟上的树枝，被地球引力嗖的一声拽了下去。
Immediately afterward, there came a dull wail and wail from the bottom of the ditch, and I thought that at least 5 or 6 of the bodies breathed through, the weight of their huge bodies betraying their lives, and most liable to die on such traps. I hastily signaled to Sarit that she should not look down, and that she must stand back and not slip. She was indeed afraid, standing alone on the boulder, for that position was nearest to the trap, and the cruel scene was close at hand. Sarit stood leaning back extremely hard on top of the boulder, crouching down before covering his eyes and ears with his hands. The number of crocodiles was so staggering that standing on top of this huge tree and looking down, the whole surface of the big slough was undulating, splashing and writhing forward with mud and water. It was like when I was in Bangkok, standing on the top of a building straddling a sniping mission, looking down on the crowded cars speeding across the road. The sight of hundreds of crocodiles running at breakneck speed can make you dizzy and fall out of a big tree if you watch it for too long. I hastily shook my head to clear my dazed consciousness. They were swooping over a wide area. The forefront was about 40 meters wide. The unlucky ones in the middle had already fallen into the trap. The The ones on either side crashed through the flowing stream and penetrated the woods trying to get a bite of that fresh meat. I didn't dare to collect any more hemp vines for fear of luring all the crocodiles under my own tree, where they would surround me and trap me alive. After all, I didn't have the skill of a long-armed monkey that could jump around in the woods and exasperate the patient trappers spelling them out. Below, crocodiles can only be arrogant in a big quagmire, stirring up muddy water or crashing through thin, short shrubs. And this stream is like the Chu River Han boundary in the Chinese chessboard. Once the crocodiles cross it, they are as passive as pawns. Because jungle running is my strong suit, I can easily pounce over the coiled roots that grow across the stream without slowing down. And ferocious crocodiles. Chassis is too low, not dare to scurry and crash in the woods. If you do not pay attention, stuck in the wrong mixed tangled roots in the mass, let it stout back. Again, how to stomp and dig, but also do not want to get rid of it. It seems to be the crocodiles. Natural shackles and cages. The bait was soon stacked up in a pile of crocodiles scrambling for clean. Ate the beginning of the neck high, with a bullish pace back to climb. Did not eat the mouth is still, swinging from side to side. Want to take a chance, see if there is no scraps of meat can be picked up. As a result, after half a day of searching and no harvest, wagging his big tail, raised his thick neck, rolled his maroon amber eyes twice, took a look at his surroundings, felt a little strange, and then looked at most of his companions who had eaten their fill and were heading towards the mud. Slew, and there was no bottom to it, and grayed out and crawled back in a group. Sarit was still crouching on the boulder, hands over his eyes, shivering. A large part of the camouflage covering the trap had collapsed above the 20-meter-long creek ditch. About half an hour later, I took a closer look at the ground. The crocodiles had almost all gone back to the big quagmire, so I gently called out to Sarit, "Sarit, don't be afraid. The crocodiles have retreated. Stand up, look around, and give me a signal flag. I'm going to come down the tree and go over." As soon as she heard my voice, she stood up, and after watching carefully for a while, swung up her banana leaves from side to side. I knew that it was safe. Climbing down the tree, I gathered up the hemp vines and cautiously walked over to the trap to check it out. More than 24 stout-bodied crocodiles were trapped down there. Some poked through the stomach, wooden sticks drilled through the center of their spines, their tips bloody. Some were even worse. The spikes of the wooden stick poked in through their jaws and ended up coming out of their eyes, the eyeballs hanging out of their sockets, hanging downward, the ooze of blood gurgling outward. They didn't even have the strength to open their mouths and yell at me. A few of the luckier crocodiles, with only their hind legs pierced through, were still writhing and struggling. Looking up from one end of the gully, these fierce and ferocious beasts were now as pitiful as geckos nailed to the wall. There is actually a pair of hard brothers, bodies stacked up and down by the same stick strung, like the hour hand and minute hand of the clock. The stream rolled over their bodies with a crash, constantly washing away the blood that gushed from their wounds. The downstream splash turned a slightly lighter red. I picked up the long pole I used to pick out the snakes and stood on the edge of the ditch poking this one and knocking that one, and some of the crocodiles that hadn't been hurt in any significant way were still flinging their big mouths around and trying to bite down on the wooden pole, their eyes burning to the point of fury. They probably wanted to rip me off and bite off a few mouthfuls of flesh to relieve their anger before they died. I could sense their intentions, so I was extra careful. If I really had to accidentally slip down, I could easily be dismantled. These a few rushed the most forward, large size, limbs athletic, usually in the crocodile group should be counted as the leader. But now in my trap, gulping is sooner or later. Back to the hundreds of crocodiles in the quagmire, it is estimated that the crocodile hegemony will be re-ranked. Fortunately, I have the habit of checking the battlefield in the last 4 or 5 meters above the Trap Creek section, still covered with false camouflage, was very close to the boulder where Sarit was standing. From the expression on my face, I could tell that there was a good harvest. Sarit was very happy to see me come over, and her eyes looked at me with joyful eagerness. I waved my hand. In a hurry, one is to express celebration with her, the second is to ask her to raise vigilance. Careful. Observation. In case the crocodile and the big quagmire quietly over a few, the same is very dangerous. The long pole continued to poke and knock at the wounded crocodiles, checking their vitality. When whistling, a strong wind hit the upper door, and a surprisingly large crocodile's mouth flung up, nearly gripping my knee. It is nearly 4 meters, sharp and huge mouth, neck fat, far larger than the proportion of body and tail, wide spine, oily scales glittering green-gray luster, signaling health and stoutness, giving a kind of it does not call the crocodile hegemony who is competing with the intimidation. I hastily dodged back, staggered a few steps and nearly fell. If not for my quick reflexes and agility, I would have been pulled down by a mouthful and cut off at that moment. When I panicked, I let out an ah. The hairs on my backbone stood up like needles, and I was sweating coldly. Sarit was also shocked by my reaction and hurriedly shouted, "Quickly, come up here." I got up and stomped onto the boulder, observing the movements in the stream. After my rapidly beating heart slowly calmed down, I realized that the giant crocodile had slipped into the trap, and its body was stuck halfway down without being poked through. It had just thrown up its tail and opened its mouth to bite me, but now it had completely fallen in. I had to kill it quickly, or the bleeding crocodile inside would be eaten by it, and that should be considered my food. I untied the laces on my riding boots, tied the dagger tightly at the end of the long pole, and made a rough but sturdy spear like last time. In fact, I could have shot it in the eye with the gun, and for long-term reasons I had to skimp on every bullet. This giant crocodile usually must be overbearing, but now fell into the bottom of the ditch. See the tragic situation of his companions. Limbs also softened and dare not move. I prostrate in the creek, squatting steadily, the tip of the spear slowly down. The dagger at the end of the pole was I used. Banana leaves wrapped, because the sharp cold light easy to make the crocodile nervous, crawling back and forth. The giant crocodile's nostrils opened and closed, gasping for air. The stream rushed against its eyes, making its natural waterproof membrane, could not help picking up and putting down to protect its eyeballs. The end of the pole close to it, the giant crocodile still did not respond. It must have thought that I was using the banana leaf branches to tease its hard leather armor, that kind of nonchalant attitude, as if to me to express contempt and disdain. My sockets contracted to the breaking point, and strength began to build up in my feet and lower back, coalescing toward my shoulders. Too late. My teeth snapped together and I stabbed down hard at one of its big brown eyes and quickly drew back the spear shaft. This time, unlike the last time I hunted a young baby crocodile, it was too risky to stab in and not let go at the giant crocodile. The giant gator's explosiveness would easily snap the poles and might even bounce me enough to make me fall down the creek. Competing with it was as stupid as an anadromous trout. My aim was to stab the giant crocodile in the eye, not to naively try to poke it to death. Chapter 19. Primitive Tranquilizers. The moment the sharp dagger poked through the giant crocodile's eyeball, the hands holding the spear shaft could clearly feel the cut of the manacle on the retina. The dagger was drawn back quickly, but the arm was still sore from the giant crocodile's frantically shaking large head. After all, piercing the eye is a kind of heartbreaking pain. It flopped its huge body violently in the stream gully, and the stream water was splashed up vertically as if a fountain had been suddenly energized. In a plaza, my whole upper body was drenched. Jets of water continued to run down the bridge of my nose along my hair, and my vision was suddenly blurred. "Come on up." Sarit called out to me again eagerly. She was worried. I jumped up sharply. Sarit instantly jumped into my arms. Although she was standing on the top of the boulder, the crocodile couldn't bite, but the thrilling and bloody scene was clear to see, especially worrying for me. Stroking Sarit's head, I nervously watched the movement in the creek ditch. The moment I stabbed and blinded the giant crocodile, I was really afraid that this big guy would pop out of the creek ditch. Needless to say what the consequences of biting me would be, just that nearly half a ton of huge body would be enough to smash me into a serious injury. The giant crocodile was still rolling and writhing violently in the gully. The small stones along the edge of the gully shook and slid down the gully. Luckily, I had just stepped on the solid rocky surface. Otherwise, I would have rolled down along with the sliding of the stones. Sarit's soft breasts were pressed tightly against my chest, and the violent heartbeats of the two of us resonated with each other. I thought her fear should be above mine, so I kissed her forehead to calm her down as soon as possible. The jets of water from the bottom of the creek were still coming straight up, some of them even splashing against the boulders and wetting Sarit and I. I hastened to hold Sarit's head over my heart, with my strong arm to prevent the big splashes from hurting her cheeks. A moment passed, and the sound of tossing in the creek gully slowly dropped. I think the giant crocodile adjusted to the pain of blindness for the moment. I gently patted Sarit and told her not to be afraid. So I jumped down from the boulder and went to inspect the movement in the stream gully again. At the moment, my heart was tense to the core, fearing that the huge fellow had a plot and was deliberately waiting for me to get close enough to leap up and swallow me up in one bound. I did not lie down directly on the edge of the ditch and look, but went to the other end of the brook gully and looked over from there so as to be farther from danger. The giant crocodile was lying on the bottom of the gully, and the rock walls on both sides were narrow for its huge frame, jamming its body into a compressed state. Now I was certain that the giant crocodile could not jump out of the gully, either because of the narrow space inside, or because of the strong current and slippery rock surface, which prevented it from exerting its strength in climbing. With this in mind, and with a slightly better sense of self-confidence, I approached the crocodile, examined its injuries, and prepared to poke out its second eye. I picked up a piece of banana leaf and the bloody dagger with stream water rinse clean, wrapped up after crouching down, slowly approaching the giant crocodile. The other crocodiles in the ditch died a lot, would have worn on the stick thorns to endure the advent of death, but the giant crocodile just now their own pain to death, which cares about their fear of not afraid to touch. The wound is pain is itchy, only care about their own ruthless vigor of the chaotic flip and crash. Inserted in the bottom of the ditch in the rocky crevices of the stick by the giant crocodile broken, the destructive force of the penetration of the crocodile wounds churned bigger, a few wounded to the hind legs of the crocodile but out of the stick fixed, although the wound blood gushing faster, but can crawl. A moment ago I was worried that the giant crocodile would eat the food that was rightfully mine, but now it seemed that anger and pain had driven away its fear and appetite, and the big, ferocious guy stumbled, leaning against the slippery rock wall at the bottom of the ditch, looking at me with his other eye, which had turned scarlet. The eyeball that had been poked and prodded by the dagger was ruptured, as if soy sauce and blood had twisted into a stream of jelly-like goo that kept sliding out of the ebony socket. The healthy eye, perhaps soaked by the blood that had melted in the stream, was extraordinarily frightening through the scarlet of the blood, and a point of burning indignation hovered over the pupil. I was in the line of sight of this eye of its, and if I fell, it could still see with this eye the shape of me it had bitten into. Or, if it could climb out from the hatred expressed in that eye, it could be sure that it would bite me to death even if it chased me to the ends of the earth, and even if I climbed back to that tall tree just now, it would still gnaw madly at the trunk below without a care in the world, and even if its teeth were broken and its lips ruptured, it still wouldn't let me go. But now its sharp teeth were still healthy, only due to the pain of the eyeball piercing just now, caused tumbling, touching and cracking much of the flesh on the mouth. The hideous giant teeth were exposed, and the broken lip flesh sticky and slimy, stuck to the protruding mouth, and was slow to be washed away by the stream. The dagger-wrapped pole head slowly approached its mouth again, and the huge, ferocious Creature ceased this time to treat me as if nothing had happened, and began to growl uneasily and irritably, growling low with its open mouth at the spearhead that came up to it, and continually lifting up its forepaws to lunge forward and try to knock off the sharp edge of the pole head. It now knew what was wrapped in the banana leaf, and was sensitive beyond measure to the pain that pierced its eyes. I was having a hard time hurting its eyes as easily as I had the first time, and stood on the edge of the ditch, shifting my attack from side to side, never finding the right moment when to do it. The sun shone more intensely. Sweat continued to trickle down my spine and chest, and I was getting a little restless and agitated, because the bottom of the ditch was full of fresh crocodile meat, the precious food that allowed us to survive, and in a few moments we would have to chip away at them and find a way to bring them back to the caves. And if we didn't seize the moment now and wait until the sky was darkened, it would be several times more dangerous to go through the woods carrying such strong-smelling food on our backs. I can't kill a giant crocodile until it's blinded, and lifting heavy rocks to hit it won't work too well, and it can shrink its leather armor for protection. If I drop too many rocks, it will step on it and climb up, then I will be in trouble. While thinking hard about the ploy, suddenly Sarit screamed, "Ah! Quickly! Come up here! Quick! Quick!" She practically shouted at me from the top of the boulder while jumping and waving her thin arms. I instantly looked back behind me, thinking another giant crocodile had crept up from the slough and was ambushing me, ready to attack. But there was no sign of the crocodile except for a few greenish-black boulders. I already thought Sarit was overstimulated, but when I looked at her again, I saw that she was bouncing even more intensely, with an anxious expression on her face, and following the point of her raised arm, I looked downstream toward the stream. Oh my God! A huge bear that can make a person's legs go limp just by looking at it had somehow appeared 50 meters downstream. It may have been foraging downstream, caught a whiff of alligator blood in the creek, and sought it out. At the moment, it was arching its fat back and craning its neck to stop downstream to look at me. This giant bear should be the first time to see a human. It stumbled for a while, seemed to be considering whether we can eat, or in what way to hunt me. Sarit stood on the boulder, began to shake non-stop. I was tempted to immediately jump on the boulder, pulling Sarit to climb up the valley, but I was afraid that my action would stimulate the wildness of the giant bear and make it come after me in a hurry, so I just stood motionless and stared at the giant bear downstream. I whispered into Sarit's lips, "Don't move, and don't lie down and play dead. That would be too risky and probably too late. The giant bear has already realized we're alive. If you really want to lie down and play dead, you'll let the giant bear take a bite and then pop up in pain. You'll lose the bear's teeth in laughter." After Sarit heard my words, she hummed and stood there motionless, her two soft and slender legs still shaking non-stop. Suddenly, she snorted out a laugh. "You're so bad, still teasing people at." This time, I didn't say anything, hoping that Sarit wouldn't be so intensely afraid if she laughed like that. But how big the risk factor, I understand in my heart. Really, in this huge wild bear entangled and now jump into the mouth of the stream to cut crocodile meat is not very different. 10 deaths without life. The giant bear was probably done judging the two of us. It didn't see soft, strong fur or spikes on us, nor did it see sharp teeth or claws. I was right not to laugh with Sarit, really showing human teeth. For it to see would more than likely make it think that the cost of making food out of us was too cheap, and then charge at us with impunity, enjoying the thrill of hunting down the tender creatures. Sarit, slowly lean back and press your body against the valley first. In case of danger, I'll pop up and be able to grab you in time to crawl upwards and escape. I whispered commands to Sarit while keeping my eyes locked with the giant bear. I wished I could fish half a crocodile out of the ditch and throw it to him, so that he could eat his fill and go somewhere else and leave us alone. No. Imagination is realistic right now, and once it attacks me, it would be best if I could escape with Sarit safely and get away from it so that the giant bear doesn't track us to our cave. The intensity of the sun's rays began to diminish, and the temperature began to drop from its highest point, and now some sea breeze blew, and gusts of slight coolness cut across my body. But I did not feel comfortable, for a murderous aura pervaded it. The giant bear's tiny eyes flashed with a glint of light, and then it shook its heavy hide and ran toward me, the brown fur shrugging and glistening with an oily sheen over the thick fat. The enemy doesn't move, I don't move. Now the giant bear ran toward me, certainly not like my Tibetan Mastiff in the military nutrition, pounced on the arms and wagged his tail, showing affection, for a few days without seeing. If this huge bear in front of me pickpocketed my body, add so too. Half of the face can immediately reveal the fresh skull. Since the bear was attacking, I couldn't hesitate, so I hurriedly scurried up the boulder and dragged Sarit upwards. Sarit was really scared, and I could clearly feel that her limbs were limp and she was out of breath. It was more terrifying for her than watching hundreds of crocodiles chasing me. All I could do was grab Sarit hard and prop her up a little. I couldn't ask her how to do it, how to cooperate with me to escape. She was still a child, too, and a tender female. I have the strength of a man, the training of a cruel man, and now must do my best to protect my kind. This girl, my little fiancée. The bear quickly impacted under the boulder, and I thought it could climb up, its strong, sturdy limbs grasping the rough rock wall and stretching its mouth to bite us. Fortunately, the boulder was shaped like a giant goose egg, and the bear's front paws were on the boulder, so it was possible to tilt its head and extend its mouth over the edge to nibble. Chapter 20. Making out on the rock wall. Even without the rocky climb of the valley, it couldn't have bitten our paws. It was just that the situation was so intimidating and frightening that it could very easily lead to vertigo and an automatic fall. One can imagine what it is like to have a giant bear's mouth, with sharp teeth bared, scurrying and biting within 20 centimeters of your ankles. The slope of the valley rock face is steep, and I climb very slowly with a limp Sarit in my arms at ND. Make sure I don't slip. The huge wild bear is scaring us with a roar and expects this outcome to happen. I glance back at the menacing giant bear to determine the distance of danger. Its wide lips were turned out at the top and bottom. Its ghastly white fangs were bare and open in a big V. The upper jaw and gum flesh of its mouth was engorged and swollen, like a woman's lower body after a long sex session and friction discoloration, translucent with the purple color of blood congealed. Under its thin skin, the piece of black flesh on the giant bear's nose was wet and spewed out air currents, blowing the dust from the top of the boulder. On the bridge of the nose, a piece of brown flesh skin turned up. Around the sticky, dried ebony blood, the white cream on the beam bone is extremely dazzling. The bear's wound was obviously not fresh and must have been caused by the impact of a hard object or a fight with a similar species. Could it be that there are many such giant bears on the island? Impossible. I am afraid that it is the only bear in the world that can grow to this size. It suddenly dawned on me that the average beast couldn't bite through a bearskin, and that this was most likely the same, equally long behemoth that posed a threat to our lives. If this wound was left by a bite from a fight with a large boar over food, then the threatener was right in front of us. Since the two beasts could have wrestled, it's assumed that either one was incredibly destructive. The injured bear's snout in front of me, it is by the big boar that kind of dead bite will not let go of. The brutal force tugged open. Thinking of this, a desire to kill in search of self-preservation boiled in my blood. This situation is so rare that if I escape now, I will give up not only food, but I will miss the opportunity to eradicate an existential threat. I must risk my life for these benefits. I gently called out to Sarit, telling her to come to her senses, to be able to pick herself up against the rock wall and not to fall. I needed to jump back onto the boulder and kill the wild bear. Sarit understood what I meant and acted in a panic, hastily hugging me and bursting into tears all at once. No, don't risk it. Give it the food. Let's go back. I'm not afraid of hunger. Sarit was very afraid that something might happen to me, and even more afraid of losing me. I Didn't have time to explain that much. I seriously asked her to brace herself and hold on to the rock wall. If the giant bear lowered its front paws lying on the boulder, it would be almost impossible to attack its vitals again. Sarit was scared by me, and with tears in her eyes, she went to grip onto the rock wall, freeing me to hold on to her body. Her delicate and soft hands couldn't hold on even after a few attempts, and as soon as I let go, her body started slipping dangerously. I know Sarit has tried her best. She is really nervous to the extreme. If not for my urging, she might have fainted long ago. My right hand gripped a recessed rock wall pit. My left hand swept over Sarit's waist and pressed her underneath, using my robust chest to squeeze her soft and delicate body against the rock wall, fiercely kissed her mouth, belly to increase suction power, and then pried open her 2 rows of neatly arranged small teeth with my tongue, wrapping and curling Sarit's fleshy tongue into her own mouth, swallowing it down her throat without stopping. Her soft breasts, a gush of moisture assaulting her proudly lifted teenage tits, resisted my toned pecs. The small of my back fired again, causing her body to increase friction between me and the rock, freeing my left hand from sliding downward. Rough 5 fingers fumbled for one of Sarit's C***K that I was squeezing, rubbing and kneading it. The cotton of her blouse was thin, and my thumbs could clearly feel the well-developed nipples. Underneath, round little handfuls of hard, soft flesh. My palms kept up the forceful F***ing of the soft liquid inside her P***sy. My index fingers and thumbs working in tandem to pinch and twist the areolas under the cloth shirt, squeezing them loosely towards the tips of her nipples. Imagining the sight I'd seen that night while guarding Sarit and Poe in the shower, knowing that white C***K and pink fleshy nipple were right there under the thin cloth, controlled by my palm and fingers. Sarit's grunts and murmurs of stimulation came to mind beside my ears, knowing that she was reacting, and my tongue felt the recoil of her fragrant tongue, an attraction and uncontrollable pursuit. My belly began to be assaulted by the strands of hot flashes emanating from Sarit's lower body, and the male organ in my lower body, through my pants, grinds hard against the convergence between the underside of her belly and between her legs, exuberantly teasing the source of the heat that has come alive. The hissing of the giant bear was still boiling below, and I wrapped my arms around Sarit, desperately trying to get her quickly aroused and out of her fear-jacketed consciousness. Sarit's soft palms began to push against my chest, probably because I was squeezing too hard, making it a little hard for her to breathe. I lifted my head and looked into her bright, autumn-filled eyes, which flashed with churlish tenderness. "Is it better now?" Sarit's cheeks blushed. She didn't expect that I would suddenly be sexually impulsive towards her at this critical juncture. After hearing my words and understanding my intention, she instantly nodded her head, and her hands began to pick and grab the rock wall, carefully lying on her back on the sloping side of the valley. Seeing that she had regained her consciousness and physical abilities, I twisted my head, looked at the top of the boulder, and fought to jump back. My toes just touched the giant bear's haphazardly torn lips, and I immediately jerked back, almost getting caught in its mouth and flung off the boulder. With my liver and brain, I touched the hanging behind the forest gun. Now is not the time for me to cherish the bullets. The dagger simply cannot get down on it, neither stabbing the bear's eyes nor cut through the bear's skin, poking the bear's mouth instead of provoking it to anger, incurring a more ferocious attack. If you let it run away, it will be buried in a more dangerous danger. The bear holds a grudge. I sharply adjusted my weapon, turned on the safety, and switched to single-shot mode, but wasn't sure whether to shoot the giant bear in the mouth or the eyes, where it would be more deadly. The arrogant giant bear, still shaking its big head and grinning, scurried and bit at my ankles. Perhaps my jumping back from the rock face was a provocation and a slight to its prowess, and the giant bear's bestiality was suddenly much stronger. The millgun sight was already aimed at its face, and as soon as the big, frantically bobbing head paused for a moment, my finger would pull the trigger at the first opportunity to let the bullet fire. Sarit, hold on to the rock wall. Close your eyes and think of me kissing you just now. Think of me rubbing against you, and don't look here or listen to any sounds. Just a moment of hesitation as the giant bear wondered why I was pointing one so small at it. With a thud, a copper-colored cartridge case popped out of the chamber and, with a crisp landing, tumbled back off the top of the boulder and into the gravel pile beside the stream. I expected the giant bear's tiny eye to blow a black hole, just like the young wild bear that attacked us that night. The bear's force was so great that it shifted the boulder beneath me a little, and the bullet missed and went into its ear and eye. The giant bear instantly let out an ear-splitting howl at the sudden pain, pressing both front paws heavily back into the ground and flinging its head from side to side, knocking the rocks around. Beside it, it probably thought the pain was burrowed into its ears like a junkie and that it would be fine if it shook it out. The boulder stilled as it left the bear's shove, and as I stood on top of it, I could clearly see blood starting to come out of one of its young, brown, rounded ears, dripping and rolling down its thick, fuzzy fur to the ground. I was worried, afraid that the bullet had merely grazed it, as enemy bullets had grazed me when I ran for my life on the battlefield. The bear's roar resounded through the valley, and I could hear, from the sound, that it was a drilling pain. The hot bullets destroying the skin in a hurry, the taste of hitting the flesh and blowing it up was horrifying, and I knew it well. Giant bear's brute force is amazing. Struggling around the crater, the ground was stirring, the stones flying around, as if a slingshot shot. I instantly crouch on the boulder, ready to make up for the second shot, but it's hard to find another opportunity to shoot. The giant bear, finally realizing that it couldn't shake off the pain in its ears and that its own flesh was being harmed by me, a prey with no sharp teeth or claws, grew extremely cranky and angry, hissing and running towards me, its two small button-like eyes revealing extreme ferocity, always believing that I wasn't as much of a threat as the large boar it had bitten to death last night. Watching it run so fast that I really thought it was going to pop up onto the top of the rock like I did, I leaned back hastily to get back to the rock face for shelter, but it was too late. Clang thought, the boulder shook twice. If not for the mountain wall behind a block, quasi by the giant bear pushed down. I also happened to be in the violent shaking of a moment, leaped onto the stone wall, otherwise must roll down, let the giant bear bite the thigh, to the boulder fell hard, brains and blood coated with it, and the crocodile in the gully smell this flavor. Dead guys will rest in peace, injured guys will be ecstatic. When the giant bear saw me like a grasshopper, running to a place where it couldn't go up, obscenely dodging its attacks, its animalistic nature expanded even more dramatically, waving its huge paw and slapping the boulder fiercely, indirectly venting its indignation at me. Sarit, make sure you hold on to the rock wall. Don't worry, keep thinking about us making out and don't open your eyes to see. After saying that, the giant bear started backing up. That wasn't turning around and leaving. It was clearly trying to boost up and leap onto the boulder to bite me to death. If the giant bear did succeed in its leap and came up to the top of the boulder, Sarit and I would surely die. It would definitely press me against the rock wall and slap my head off, and Sarit would not be able to withstand the fall down the valley and get hurt, and still end up being eaten by the bear. There was no choice but to push my life and death struggle with the giant bear to the limit once again. At the moment when the bear's front paws slid down to the ground, I saw the right moment to jump back to the top of the boulder, lightning fast to adjust back to the weapon's continuous fire, and raise the barrel of the gun aimed at its face. The bullet is certainly precious, but at this moment is exactly used to save life. 24 rounds were fired in quick succession, followed by screams and wails emanating from the giant bear's thick throat. I knew the attributes of the dense forest gun. It was mainly used for distributing face shots. Point-to-point shooting was not as lethal as a rifle unless it was killing, or hitting a hard target in the vitals. The bullet now hitting the giant bear's thickly furred face was no different from a human being hit in the cheek with a slingshot, painful but not fatal.